If you'd glanced through the tall windows of my Grandma Beatrice's Victorian house that night, you'd have sworn you were witnessing the kind of wholesome family gathering that gets immortalized in greeting cards. Candles flickered on a polished oak table covered in heirloom china, laughter bubbled up around the edges, and the air smelled like rosemary roast chicken and the faint bite of expensive Chardonnay. But from my seat wedged between a potted fern and a cousin Liv streaming herself eating salad, I knew better. The warmth was a thin varnish over years of neglect and favoritism so blatant it didn't even bother hiding anymore. I was just grateful for the corner spot where no one expected me to perform polite interest in Landon's never-ending monologue about how his wellness startup was going to revolutionize the smoothie industry. I'd been practicing my neutral face all evening, like some unpaid extra in the Landon show. Grandma turned 80 that night, though she didn't look it. Her sharp blue eyes still managed to pin you like a bug on display. I'd always loved that about her. She was the only person who could look straight through the charming nonsense my parents conjured like stage magicians. It was around the time dessert appeared, tiny plates of artisanal chocolate tarts no one asked for, that she cleared her throat. The room hushed automatically, everyone trained by decades of experience to stop talking when she did. She set down her fork with delicate precision and looked straight at me. A hush spread out from her like ripples in a pond. "Eli," she said, her voice clear enough to cut glass, "is the $1,500 I wire you each month covering everything you need for school? You know how sometimes you think you heard something wrong, like your brain files it under, surely not, and tries to move on." Yeah. My brain did that. I blinked, my mouth actually hanging open like a cartoon character. I managed. "What money?" It was as though someone turned the volume knob all the way to 0. Even the clicking of Aunt Denise's phone camera stopped. Every single head rotated toward my parents, Frank and Vivian, the dynamic duo of selective generosity. My dad's face went the color of an overcooked turkey. My mom's smile froze so hard you could practically hear the enamel crack. They looked like people who'd been caught siphoning gas on security footage, surprised, cornered, and already rehearsing their excuses. Grandma didn't so much as blink. She just shifted her gaze to them with all the measured patience of a judge about to pronounce a life sentence. "I asked," she repeated, her tone lighter but somehow more terrifying, "whether the allowance I have been sending every month since Eli started university has been sufficient. Because if not, all you needed to do was say so." I felt the blood drain from my face. An allowance. Since I started school. That would have been 3 years ago. My brain tried to do the math but stopped somewhere around $1, 500 times 36. Landon, across the table, made an exaggerated sigh and went back to poking at his tart, as though this entire humiliating reveal was an inconvenient interruption of his plans to become the next Jeff Bezos of kale. The silence stretched out, long and heavy and absolutely delicious in a sick way. For the first time, no one could pretend we were the kind of family that supported each other. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded weirdly detached, like I was narrating someone else's life. "I've never received any money," I said. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out anyway. "I didn't even know you were sending anything." A collective exhale seemed to rush around the table, some people appalled, others barely suppressing glee at the spectacle. Uncle Jared's wife looked like she just tuned into the best reality show of her life. My mom made a sound halfway between a cough and a strangled laugh. "Oh, well," she began, her voice brittle. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." Grandma's eyebrow climbed a fraction of an inch. If she'd been wearing glasses, I'm pretty sure she would have peered over the top of them just to maximize the withering effect. "A misunderstanding," she repeated. It wasn't a question. Dad cleared his throat and shifted in his chair. He began, using the nickname he only tried when he was about to lie. "Maybe we should discuss this, privately." Grandma Beatrice folded her napkin with exquisite precision and set it beside her plate. Then she folded her hands together and gave them both a look I'd seen exactly twice in my life. The look she gave the lawyer who tried to shortchange her on Grandpa's estate, and the look she gave the waiter who dared to serve her Merlot at room temperature. "I don't think that will be necessary," she said, her voice soft as snowfall but sharp enough to draw blood. Across the table, Landon sighed again, as if the spectacle of my life imploding was an annoying background noise. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something in my chest that wasn't just shame or exhaustion. It was the first flicker of a realization. Maybe I wasn't the problem here. I wish I could tell you that in that moment, sitting there while the air curdled around us, I felt some grand epiphany. That all my years of exhaustion and resentment dissolved in a surge of self-respect. But mostly, I just felt tired. The kind of tired that settles behind your eyes and never leaves. While Landon drained his third glass of Pinot and Mom rehearsed her next lie, my mind replayed the last 3 years. Like a grim highlight reel I never asked to star in. I remembered my overnight shifts at the Chevron station off Division. The lights were so harsh they made everything look like a mugshot. I'd spend those hours refilling the coffee urn, wiping counters no one cared about, wondering if the fatigue was ever going to fade. Then there were the nights at the diner. Not the cute retro kind. This was the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a boss who called everyone sport. My uniform always smelled like fryer oil. My feet ached so badly by the end of my shift I'd lie in bed and imagine what it felt like not to hurt all the time. Landon, of course, was living in a loft with exposed brick and a view of the river. He posted selfies captioned things like #RiseAndGrind and manifesting abundance, as if his rent wasn't paid by the same people telling me I should be more self-sufficient. I thought of the day Grandma promised me help, like it was stamped on my bones. It was August. The air shimmered with heat. I was sitting on her porch, clutching my acceptance letter to Portland State. My chest was so full I thought it might crack open. "You work for this," she told me, her voice warm. "You're not going to struggle your way through college. I'll help. You deserve the chance to just focus." I tried to protest, and she'd swatted my hand like I was being ridiculous. "This is my gift," she said. "My investment in you." So when fall came and no money showed up, I told myself it was a bank delay. Maybe she changed her mind. Maybe I didn't deserve it. I didn't ask. I just picked up more hours. I learned exactly how many cans of soup I could buy for $5. I stopped going out with classmates because I couldn't afford a single beer. The day I finally cracked, it was December. I was home for Christmas, watching Landon unwrap a new iPad while Mom cooed over how hard he worked. I remember the heat creeping up my neck as I thought about my rent coming due. Later, when she was alone in the kitchen, arranging roses, I forced the words out. "Mom, did Grandma ever mention helping me with tuition?" She didn't even look up. "Eli," she said lightly, "you're an adult now. We can't hold your hand forever." My heart thudded. "I'm not asking for handouts," she said. She finally turned, her mouth pressed tight. "Your brother doesn't sit around waiting for help," she snapped. "He makes things happen. Maybe you should try that instead of expecting charity." And just like that, the subject was closed. I went back to school in January pretending I was fine. I told myself maybe scraping by was good for me. Character building. But as I sat at that table, with everyone's eyes flicking between me and my parents, something cracked. Maybe it wasn't character I'd been building. Maybe it was a tolerance for being treated like I didn't matter. You'd think, when you get caught with your hand in the metaphorical cookie jar, say, siphoning tens of thousands of dollars earmarked for your kid's future, you'd have the decency to look ashamed. But my parents just looked annoyed. My mom's brittle smile flickered as she straightened her napkin, as though delaying eye contact might somehow rewind the last 5 minutes. My dad stared intently at the salt shaker like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Eli," Mom began, her voice pitched high and bright. "I think you're confused." "Confused?" I repeated deadpan. "Sweetheart," she continued, her fingers twisting the napkin to shreds. "We were saving it for you. For a special occasion. Like graduation." Her tone was so practiced, so syrupy, that for a second I almost believed her. Almost. Across the table, Landon rolled his eyes. "Oh, for God's sake," he muttered loud enough that everyone heard. Grandma Beatrice didn't flinch. She turned her gaze on my dad, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Frank, she said in a voice you'd used to address a particularly slow child. Perhaps you'd like to clarify when exactly you intended to mention this surprise fund? He cleared his throat. Twice. Well, he croaked. You know how it is, B. We thought it would be more meaningful to give it to him as a lump sum. Help him get started in life after graduation. My cousin Zoe, who'd been silently filming the entire exchange on her phone, probably for her group chat, actually snorted. Meaningful. Grandma echoed, her face blank. The air in the room shifted. The way she was staring at my parents, it felt like watching someone prepare to pull a lever marked retribution. Meaningful, she repeated, her voice deceptively mild. I see. And the money I sent for Eli's tuition, where is it now? My mother's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. You could almost hear the gears grinding as she tried to spin something that wouldn't immediately collapse under scrutiny. We had some unexpected expenses, she said at last. Aunt Denise leaned forward, clearly savoring every second. Oh? She purred. Like what? My dad shifted in his seat, his face mottled red. Your brother. He began and stopped. Landon's head snapped up. Oh, don't you dare. He hissed. Grandma turned slowly to Landon. I think, she said, that's precisely who we're talking about. He threw his hands up. This is ridiculous. I needed help for a few months. Big deal. Everyone here knows starting a business takes resources. Sorry, I'm actually trying to build something instead of playing martyr. His contempt hit me like a slap. I felt my jaw tighten. Playing martyr? I repeated. You mean working 2 jobs so I didn't starve? Landon gave an exaggerated shrug, like my existence was an inconvenience he'd long grown bored of. Grandma inhaled through her nose, slow and deliberate, as though counting down to avoid launching a butter knife across the table. So, she said, turning back to my parents, let me be sure I understand. You stole from Eli's education fund because Landon needed resources. My mother's hands were trembling now. We were going to pay it back, she whispered. When? Grandma asked. Silence. The whole table held its breath. Even the cousins who usually avoided family drama were riveted. Finally, Dad muttered, we didn't think it would come up tonight. Grandma folded her hands, her rings glinting under the chandelier. It has come up, she said, her voice quiet and lethal. And we are not done here. I felt something loosen in my chest. For once, someone was seeing it, seeing me. And the best part? They couldn't look away. If the atmosphere before had been tense, it now felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Nobody moved. Nobody dared break the hush that had settled like a storm cloud. Except, of course, Landon's fiancée, Natalie. She'd been silent most of the evening, sitting stiffly beside him in a cream blouse that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But the second Landon dismissed me with that smug little shrug, something in her expression cracked. She set her wineglass down with a precision that was almost violent. We need to talk, she said to Landon, her voice low and precise. Landon looked startled. Not now, he muttered. No, she repeated. She stood so quickly her chair nearly toppled over. Half the table flinched. My mom let out a small, strangled laugh, as if to pretend this was all some hilarious misunderstanding. Natalie ignored everyone. She stared at Landon with an intensity I'd never seen from her, an intensity that made even Grandma's glare look like a friendly nod. Come with me, she said. And this time, it wasn't a request. Landon looked around for backup, but nobody offered him any. He pushed his chair back with a scowl and followed her into the hallway, grumbling under his breath. They didn't bother closing the door. Which meant all of us were treated to the low, furious hiss of Natalie's voice. You lied to me. A pause. Landon's muffled protest. All of it. She snapped. The money. The ring. You told me it was handled. The ring. I felt a prickle run down my spine. I sold it because you said we were going under. She nearly shouted. Do you know how humiliating that was? I glanced around the table. Everyone was frozen, pretending not to listen while hanging on every syllable. I had to pawn my grandmother's ring. She hissed, her voice cracking. And now I find out you've been leeching off your family? Off Eli? Something heavy twisted in my chest. It wasn't even the betrayal anymore. It was the realization that maybe I'd never been the only one he was willing to ruin to protect his own ego. Landon's voice dropped to a furious whisper. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard enough. I'll fix it. You're overreacting. It's none of your business. Natalie didn't respond right away. When she did, her tone was so cold it made the hair on my arms stand up. We're done. A moment later, she stepped back into the dining room. Her cheeks were blotchy, her eyes bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady as steel. Congratulations, she said, scanning the table like she was memorizing every face. You can all have him. Then she turned to me. And in her eyes, God help me, there was something like an apology. A silent acknowledgement that we'd both been collateral damage in the same endless cycle. With a final, decisive nod, she strode to the front door and yanked it open. Landon came stumbling in after her, his face red, his mouth opening to spit more excuses. But Natalie was already gone. The door slammed shut behind her with a force that rattled the china. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. Then, as if the universe needed to add punctuation to the moment, a small slip of paper fluttered gently to the floor near Landon's chair. I recognized it instantly. A pawn ticket. Gold and Gems Pawn Emporium, the logo in bright, garish gold. My gaze met Landon's. He looked at the ticket, then at me, and for the first time all night, he seemed genuinely afraid. I bent down, picked it up, and turned it over in my hand. The date. The item description. 1.5 carat diamond ring. The ring Natalie had just said she pawned. Only, something didn't add up. The payout listed was $2,000. Less than half what that ring was worth. I looked at him, my pulse thudding in my throat. You sold it, I said quietly, the realization dawning like dawn breaking over a battlefield. And you pocketed the rest. He didn't deny it. For a split second, I could almost see it on his face, that tiny, pathetic hope that maybe I'd keep quiet. Maybe I'd let this slide, just like I'd let everything else slide. I felt something in me harden. I slipped the pawn ticket into my pocket and straightened up. Grandma's gaze was locked on me, and I knew, without a single word spoken, that she understood exactly what I intended to do next. I wasn't done. Not even close. The dining room was a battlefield of shattered illusions and scorched reputations, but in that moment, none of it mattered to me. All I could think about was the pawn ticket burning a hole in my pocket, and the certainty that if Landon was willing to sell a family heirloom, he was hiding worse. I slipped away while everyone was still locked in the silent aftermath of Natalie's exit. Nobody tried to stop me. Honestly, I don't think they even noticed. I climbed the stairs two at a time, my heart hammering in my ears. The upstairs hallway was dark and still. Landon's old bedroom door loomed at the end, its brass knob glinting faintly in the shadows. I hesitated only a second before pushing it open. The smell hit me first, stale body spray mixed with the musty tang of unwashed laundry. The place looked exactly like the lair of someone who thought the universe owed him a break. Dirty clothes draped over furniture, half-empty protein shake bottles lined up like sad trophies. I scanned the mess, feeling the kind of grim determination that comes when you're too tired to feel afraid anymore. He would have kept records. Landon was arrogant, but he wasn't careless. Somewhere in this pigsty was proof that the money Grandma sent me hadn't been the only thing he'd helped himself to. I started with the desk. Mostly junk, old receipts, a few crumpled resumes he'd probably printed during one of his brief, motivated phases. Nothing useful. I checked under the bed next, swallowing my disgust as my hand brushed something sticky. A pizza box. Classic. Then my eyes landed on the closet. It was an old walk-in with sagging shelves and a single, lonely light bulb. My pulse quickened. If he'd hidden anything important, it would be there. I tugged the door open and stepped inside. Shoes, a few boxes of college textbooks he never read, a ratty duffel bag. But up on the highest shelf, half buried in dust, sat a battered Nike shoebox. My breath caught. I dragged a chair over and climbed up, stretching to pull it down. The cardboard sagged under the weight of whatever was inside. I carried it to the bed and sat, wiping my sweaty palms on my jeans. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I lifted the lid. Inside was a mess of paperwork, all held together by a single brittle rubber band. My hands were shaking as I slid it free. The top layer was exactly what I expected: overdue credit card statements, final notices, interest charges so absurd they looked like typos. But as I flipped through them, something else caught my eye: thicker envelopes, all stamped with the same logo in bold black font, Westbrook Capital Solutions. I'd never heard of them. I pulled one out, unfolding it with slow, dread-filled care. Final notice before legal action. The letters were so large and aggressive they practically shouted off the page. My eyes drifted to the name at the top, my name. Eli Morgan. For a few seconds, I couldn't process what I was reading. My brain refused to connect the dots. Then I read the second line. My old dorm address. I felt my stomach drop clean through the floor. I tore through the stack, each letter worse than the last. Warnings of wage garnishment, threats of lawsuits, notices of default. At the bottom of the pile, the original loan agreement. $25,000. Taken out 2 years ago. In my name. I stared at the signature. A shaky imitation of mine, just close enough to pass a casual glance. My throat closed up. My ears rang. Identity theft. My own brother had stolen my information, probably straight out of my parents' tax files, and saddled me with a debt big enough to crush whatever scraps of credit I might have had. A weird calm settled over me. It wasn't relief. It was the cold, final understanding that I hadn't been imagining things. I hadn't been dramatic or ungrateful or weak. I'd been prey. And Landon, the golden boy with his designer sneakers and empty ambition, was the predator. I closed the shoebox and drew in a long, shaking breath. If I confronted him now, he'd spin another lie. If I took this straight to my parents, they'd find a way to make it my fault. I needed an ally. I needed Grandma. I gathered every letter, every notice, and the pawn ticket. My hands were steady as I stacked them into a neat pile. And for the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't exhaustion or shame. I felt resolve. Grandma Beatrice's study had always felt like a place apart from the rest of the house, quieter, older, anchored by that massive mahogany desk she'd inherited from her grandfather. It was the kind of room that smelled like old books, lemon polish, and the unspoken expectation that you'd better tell the truth. I stood outside her closed door for a moment, my hand resting on the knob. Part of me was still that kid who thought if I just tried hard enough, I'd be worthy of love without conditions. But the other part, the part that had slept in a freezing apartment and eaten cold soup for dinner, was done begging. I knocked twice. A measured, deliberate sound. Her voice came, quiet but unmistakably firm. "Come in." She was sitting behind her desk, a single lamp illuminating her lined face. She didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, she looked resigned, as though she'd known exactly where I'd gone and why. "Eli," she said, her eyes flicking to the stack of papers in my arms. "Sit down." I did, the chair creaking under me. My heart felt weirdly calm, like it had finally stopped trying to sprint away from this moment. "I think," I began, my voice hoarse, "you should see these." I set everything on the desk, pawn ticket on top, followed by the letters from Westbrook Capital. One by one, she picked them up, reading without saying a word. The only sound was the clock on the bookshelf ticking away the last shreds of my old illusions. Her expression didn't change as she read. But when she reached the loan agreement, the one with my name and that cheap forgery of my signature, her hands began to tremble. She laid the final letter down and met my eyes. There was no confusion, no doubt. Just a hard, glittering fury I'd never seen from her before. "He stole your identity," she said. Not a question. A statement. I nodded. My throat was too tight to speak. She looked past me for a moment, as if searching the shadows for the moment everything had gone so wrong. "And your parents," she continued, her voice colder than winter, have been covering for him. It wasn't even a question anymore. We both knew the answer. I exhaled shakily. They called it a rough patch. Her jaw clenched. A rough patch. She repeated the words like they were poison in her mouth. I thought she might cry. But Grandma Beatrice didn't cry. She straightened her spine instead, like someone bracing for impact. I want you to listen to me very carefully, she said, her gaze pinning me in place. This is not your fault. Somehow, hearing her say it almost broke me more than the betrayal itself. I thought I was just not enough, I admitted, my voice small. That if I worked harder or complained less, they'd love you? She finished quietly. I nodded. She reached across the desk and laid her hand over mine. Her skin was thin, but her grip was steady as iron. They do love you in their way, she said softly. But sometimes love twisted by selfishness is worse than hate. I swallowed, trying to absorb the truth of it. Her hand squeezed mine once before she pulled away. She gathered the papers into a precise stack, aligning the corners. This ends tonight, she said, her tone as final as a closing door. I stared at her. You're going to confront them? We are going to confront them, she corrected. You will not carry this alone. The relief that flooded me was so sharp it hurt. What if they deny it? I asked. Her eyes sparked. Then I will remind them I still control this family's money, and their last shred of social standing. A laugh, bitter and disbelieving, escaped me. That's kind of terrifying, I admitted. Her lips twitched. Good. She stood, smoothing her skirt with the same composure she'd always carried into board meetings and funerals alike. Are you ready? She asked. I thought about the years I'd spent shrinking myself, about the nights I'd gone to sleep believing I was a burden. I thought about Landon's smirk, my mother's dismissive tone, my father's silence. And I realized I was ready, more ready than I'd ever been for anything. Yes, I said. Then come on, she said, her hand resting briefly on my shoulder as we turned toward the hall. It's time they all heard the truth. When Grandma and I stepped back into the dining room, the room felt so quiet I could hear the radiator ticking. My parents looked up, their faces hopeful, like maybe they'd imagined I'd decided to forget everything and pretend nothing happened. They had no idea. Grandma walked to the head of the table. She didn't sit. She placed the stack of papers in front of her, her expression smooth as polished steel. Everyone, she began, her voice carrying across the table without needing to rise. We need to clarify a few things. My dad shifted uncomfortably. My mother's mouth flattened. Landon went back to scrolling his phone, pretending he wasn't listening. Grandma picked up the pawn ticket first. She held it between two fingers, delicate and damning. This, she said evenly, is proof that Landon pawned Natalie's engagement ring to cover debts. And lied about it. Landon finally looked up. It was a temporary loan, he muttered. She ignored him. Next, she lifted one of the letters from Westbrook Capital. This, she continued, her voice colder now, is proof that he used Eli's identity to secure a $25,000 loan. My mother gasped. That's not... Elizabeth, Grandma interrupted, her tone razor sharp. Do not finish that sentence. Mom closed her mouth. I watched the realization dawn on my father's face, that nothing he could say would fix this. Grandma turned to Landon. You stole from your brother. You stole from Natalie. And your parents helped you hide it. Landon's jaw worked, searching for words. It wasn't, I didn't. You did, she said simply. She let the silence stretch so long it became unbearable. I am finished watching you all treat Eli as if he's disposable, she went on. And I am finished funding this farce. My father swallowed audibly. As of tonight, she said, her voice like ice, I am cutting off all financial support. Every cent you've stolen will be repaid to Eli, with interest. My mother's eyes widened in horror. Please, we can work something out. No, Grandma said, her gaze pinning them like insects. You will not guilt him. You will not twist this into his burden. Then she looked at me. Her expression softened. I am so sorry, she said quietly. For every year you were made to feel you were less. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. She turned back to the table, her voice regaining that implacable calm. Tomorrow I will meet with my lawyer, she concluded. My will and all trusts will be revised. My legacy will not be squandered by cowards. Nobody argued. Nobody dared. Landon looked at me then, his face twisted in a fury I recognized, a man who'd always believed consequences were for other people. For a second, I almost pitied him. Almost. When it was over, nobody tried to stop me as I stood up. Not my mother, whose tears finally came when she realized pleading wouldn't work. Not my father, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in a single evening. Not Landon, whose glare followed me like a promise of future blame. I didn't care. I walked out into the cold night air with Grandma at my side. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The next morning, she kept every word she'd said. A lawyer met me at her house with a fresh stack of papers, new trust documents, an account in my name alone, every dollar she'd intended for me restored plus more. To make up for the indignity, she called it. It felt surreal. Like stepping from a nightmare into clarity so bright it hurt. For the first time in my life, I could breathe without feeling like each inhale was a debt I'd never repay. I used part of the money to clear the fraudulent loan. The rest I tucked away. Not to splurge, not to show off, just to know I'd never have to beg for rent again. Weeks passed. My old life peeled away piece by piece. I quit the night job. I started eating food that didn't come from a dented can. My grades shot up. And slowly, something shifted inside me. I stopped waking up braced for another disappointment. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was allowed to have peace. The calls began soon enough, first from my mother, her voice sticky sweet, pretending none of it had happened. Then from my father, solemn and regretful. Just come by for dinner, he pleaded once. We can start over. I didn't respond. Landon tried texting me exactly once. A single line. Hope you're happy. I deleted it without replying. Eventually, they stopped trying. I spent Sundays with Grandma instead. Sometimes Grandpa would join us, sitting quiet in his recliner. He never apologized the way she did, but one evening he pressed a battered envelope into my hand, old photos of me as a toddler, perched on his knee. I always knew you'd find your footing, he said gruffly. I'm sorry I didn't help you sooner. That was enough. Months passed. My world got bigger. I applied to graduate programs I'd never dared consider. When the acceptance letter arrived, from a public policy program I'd only dreamed about, I sat on my couch and cried until my chest ached. Because it wasn't just a school. It was proof that I'd escaped. That I wasn't the invisible son anymore. I was just Eli. And that was enough.